This from Sam to open up today's show. Oh, God, here we go. Kevin, time for a name conversation again? Question mark, question mark. Trump was asked about it, and he's in favor of going back to the old name. What say you? I say, Sam, for me, anyway, it's probably time to stop digging. Good morning, everybody. Tom's thoughts, as in Tom Lavero's thoughts, on the Rizzo and Davey Martinez firings coming up in about 15 minutes. Grant Paulson will be on the show with us at 11. We'll talk some Nats and maybe do some football as well. Before I get to what Trump said about the name yesterday, I think it was, he also said something about the stadium. I wanted to just mention what I've been watching here, Max, for the last hour and a half. In fact, I have it on right now in my studio. Since about 8:30, I've been watching the Wimbledon quarterfinal match between number one in the world, Sabalenka, and Laura Siegemund from Germany. I talked about Laura Siegemund 2 years ago after her first round loss in the U.S. Open to Coco Gauff. And I came in here and did about 15 minutes on that match because she was booed out of the stadium by the Arthur Ashe Stadium, New York crowd because of the way she plays. It was a very tight match. She lost that match in the first round to Coco Gauff in 3 sets. And I said, I thought it was thrilling sports to watch. It was thrilling tennis to watch. Because this woman, Laura Siegemund, is 37 years old now. She's the oldest player since Billie Jean King back in the 70s to make the quarterfinals of Wimbledon. And she does it with not overpowering strokes, ground strokes, or an unbelievable serve. This is the ultimate in craftiness, the ultimate in brains over brawn. I mean, I have, from very much a distance since that night against Coco Gauff, and I was rooting for Coco Gauff to go into that evening, and then I found myself rooting for this, at the time, 35-year-old German who was being booed for her slices and her drop shots and her taking time in between serves. She's very deliberate. She's slow, admittedly slow, but whatever she can use within the rules to get an edge on her opponent. I love watching those players, those teams that are undermanned or overwhelmed athletically that still compete and can still win. She's got 12 wins in her career over top 10 players. She's into the quarterfinals of Wimbledon for the first time. She reached the quarterfinals of another major back in 2020. That was the last time, at the French Open in 2020. She's been primarily a great doubles player. The night that she lost to Coco Gauff and was booed and jeered, as the ball was tossed for a serve, people were yelling and sneezing. It was really a very awkward night. This was in September of 2023. And she got multiple time violations and even was, penalized a point for sort of delaying and playing slowly. They now time in between points, but it's loosely sort of regulated if you watch tennis. And she came into the press conference that night, and that press conference has been watched millions of times, and she broke down. She was very upset. She said, I just, and I'll net it out for you. She essentially said, I gave everything I had on the court. The match was a high level match, and no one respected it or appreciated it. And she said, she admitted, I understand people rooting for the American. I'm German. When I play in Stuttgart or anywhere in Germany, they're rooting for me, but not at the expense of the opponent, not sneezing with the ball up in the air on a serve, not yelling out during, a second serve, not cheering, double faults. Now, that happens in sports, and I think tennis players get a little bit too sensitive when it comes to things like that. But I remember that night watching her match and then watching the press conference and becoming a fan. And I'm not sitting there watching Laura Siegemund matches, but in the majors, I will always kind of keep an eye to see if she's won a match or two. And she does pretty well, but she does better in doubles, and she's get injured a lot. She's 37. That is grandmotherly in that sport of tennis. That is so old, especially on the women's side in particular. And she has gone through the draw here at Wimbledon. She beat Madison Keys, who was the 6th seed in the second round. It was a big upset. She's won 2 times since, and here she is in the quarterfinals. And she won the first set against Sabalenka. They're in the second set right now. And she won the first set with just this incredible array of tennis shots that you just don't see very often. I was listening to the pregame of this with guys like Brad Gilbert. Brad Gilbert had back in his day, his game was made of junk. I mean, junk shots, because he wasn't, the most talented. And to watch Sabalenka, who is an overpowering, clear-cut, massive favorite in this match, minus 2,000 to win this match. And she still might win this match. And is the number 1 in the world and the heavy favorite to win Wimbledon. To watch her struggle with these sliced returns, these drop shots, and then mixing in power occasionally with 78-mile-per-hour first serves. I love that. I love the player or the team that is not undermanned, but clearly overmatched by the opponent, and they figure out a way to compete. They figure out a way to make it interesting, to give them the best chance to win, because that's the ultimate goal. Entertaining the crowd is not the ultimate goal. Winning for her is the ultimate goal. I actually wagered this morning on her, all right, plus 6.5 games for this match. Plus 6.5 games at minus 110. It was basically even money. And I bet on her to win the match at plus 750 to win the match. Now, I wasn't expecting her to win the match, but I'm like, she'll junk it up enough. She'll use her craftiness, her brains, and she's very competitive. She's 5'6". She's nowhere near the size of some of the big tennis players on the women's side. It has been compelling as you know what to watch. Love sports when it's that kind of matchup and that kind of David versus Goliath. But Goliath, David is using guile. We've seen pitchers do that. We've seen, basketball players. She plays at her own pace. She's never rushed. It's fun to watch. Most people hate it. It's interesting. The players can't stand it. They hate to play her. And yet here she is at 37 years old in the quarterfinals of Wimbledon, and she is up a set and on serve in the second, down 3-2. I will keep you posted on this match. 37 years old, beating number 1 in the world. This would be a huge sports story around the world, not necessarily here. We don't love tennis like the rest of the world does. South America and Europe and Australia love tennis. I mean, it is way up there on the list. But this would be a massive sports upset if it happens at Wimbledon. I'll keep you posted on all of that. So back to Sam's note to me. Kevin, time for a name conversation. Again, Trump was asked about it, and he's in favor of going back to the old name. What say you? Play what Trump said, Max. Was this yesterday or the day before?
This was yesterday during the show. Yeah. That's when it came out. Do you want the commander's name or the RFK bit?
The name.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's hear Donald Trump on the commander's name.
The Commanders changed the name back to Redskins?
Well, do you want me to make a controversial statement? I would. I wouldn't have changed the name, but that's there. It just doesn't have the same it doesn't have the same ring to me. But, winning can make everything sound good. So if they win, all of a sudden the Commander sounds good. But I wouldn't have changed the name.
Okay. I mean, honestly, I read the what he said, and now hearing that with a little bit of tone, I mean, it's what everybody has kind of said. Most people, certainly who have followed this story, a lot of people, certainly fans of the team, longtime fans of the team, understand that there wouldn't be anything wrong with going back to it, but it ain't going to happen. And I said at the top of the show just a few minutes ago, I said, for me, it's almost like it's time to stop digging. Not that I've been digging recently. I've come to grips with it ain't ever coming back. Sabah, I mean, bless her heart. Every DM she sends me, or certainly 80% of the DMs that she sends me, are name related. What have I been saying all this time? Commanders, Magic Johnson, this is your golden opportunity to do the right thing and give us the Washington Redskins that we all know and love, HTTR, for our name, hashtag. Kevin, please push this. Stop saying the name is never coming back. Be a failure, not a quitter. I love that. Kevin, keep talking about her name and stop saying it will never come back. Keep the pressure on Josh Harris. Remember, Snyder said in all caps, I will never change our name. And he changed it. So just because Josh says we are not changing our name doesn't mean it's over, but we must keep fighting. Yeah, I'm tired of the fight, honestly. Most of you know how I feel. For those of you who don't, I think it was ridiculous that this wasn't debated in a much greater way. It was always a debate. It was always a complex conversation. It was never the mic drop moment that the Redskins people thought it was. Dictionary defined racist term or, pejorative or insensitive. It never meant that. It hasn't meant that for 75 years. The word Redskins, as we've talked about many times in the past, has meant for the last 75 years, and language does evolve. It does. That's why you see dictionaries petition for updated definitions of words, because language evolves. And that word has meant the football team, professional football team that plays in Washington, or the word Redskin means a football player who plays for the pro football team in Washington. Like I've always used that example. Nobody walks into a bar and says, hey, man, there are a couple of Redskins over at the bar. And the other guy says, oh, really? Some Native Americans? No. They'll say, is Jaden Daniels one of them? Who else is there? Is Bobby Wagner over there? Because that's what the word means and has meant for years. But here's the problem. Twofold. One, it was lost because Dan didn't do a good enough job of, first of all, getting closer to significant and meaningful Indian reservations. He didn't do a good enough job preventing it with, perhaps, as I've suggested for 15 years, petitioning dictionaries for a second non-pejorative definition. But lastly, and this is the most important part, Dan not being a decent human being ultimately cost us the name. Not just because, of the Fred Smith situation, in the summer of 2020. And look, everything was ripe for being canceled in the summer of 2020, even things that were silly to be canceled. And we understand that more today than we did in that moment. But the all caps was just stupid. He was antagonizing the other side when it came to this. And there was enough data to speak for itself. He should have been pushing with Indian reservations. He should have been pushing dictionaries. He should have been behind the scenes, creating an environment of a decent human being owning a team with a name that is controversial, yes, but a very complex conversation, and certainly not leading to any compelling reason to get rid of it. But because he wasn't a good person, because he wasn't very bright when it came to this, it got in the summer of 2020. And if it wasn't Fred Smith, it may have been somebody else. So it's over. It's been over. The NFL is a $25 to $26 billion industry. They're not going back or allowing Washington to go back to something that's unnecessarily controversial, no matter what arguments make sense to end the controversy. Those that are spending the money, networks, big NFL corporate sponsors that create this $25 to $26 billion industry, don't want it. And they don't want the league to go back to it. It's much easier for them to stop it now since it's gone than it was to get rid of it when it was here. But it isn't here anymore. The horse left the barn, people. It's done. They have said this, over and over again, whether it's Mitch Rales or whether it was Josh Harris recently. Now, the changing the current name to me is a completely different conversation. Obviously, I would want Redskins back. Of course, I would want Redskins back. And I felt that way my entire life when the name was still there in terms of pushing back on those that wanted it gone. And once it was gone, I wanted it back. But I know where it is now. It's in the hands of the league and the league's $26 billion, revenue partners. It's not coming back. And then there's the whole idea of, can they go it alone without that name or without changing the name and create the kind of business that they want to create? And I think they feel after last year, and last year made it a lot easier, 12-5, 2 playoff wins, created this path of least resistance, because early in the season, it was still being debated among the people out in Ashburn about what they would do about it. They got kind of a gift horse, and they didn't stare it down. They took it. And is it possible that somewhere down the road we could get, another idea for a new branding? Yeah, but only if they turned into a loser. And with this quarterback, I don't think they're going to turn into a loser. So I think it's over. I think it's been over. I hate it, like all of you do, or like many of you do. But I kind of know when it's time to stop digging. It may not make sense to a lot of normal thinking people about this name. But again, the unnecessary controversy that even the discussion of bringing the name back would get is not going to happen with the powers in the NFL running a $26 billion industry. Dan had a chance. He had a chance to approach it in a different way, a more strategic way. But he was, as we know, not very strategic. He was impulsive. And that's the way he operated. And so it'll never, ever, ever, never, ever, ever change, in all caps, was the impulsive emotional response, not the response of somebody thinking this through. There should have been a lot of work with, dozens of influential and big Indian reservations. It's the same thing that, the Seminoles do, Florida State and others do. There could have been, I recommended it to Bruce Allen in our studio 15 years ago. Why don't you petition dictionaries for a second non-pejorative definition? He was glossed over, had no concept of what I was suggesting. And I said, it happens all the time. And this one really makes sense. Maybe it wouldn't have been accepted, but, it was worth the try. And then just being decent human beings during that whole process probably would have helped them. But they weren't any of those things, and they didn't do any of those things. And because of that, they were an even bigger target when it came to the name, because they were dumb and arrogant and not good people for the most part. So I'm never going to stop feeling about the old name the way I felt my entire life. I'm just not going to continue to say and I haven't said for a year now, at least a year, that it's possible and that we need to keep up the fight for the old name. No, it's not coming back. I still have hope that one day the current name would go away to Washington football team. Then we could just call them the Skins. I call them the Skins anyway, a lot of the time. But the old name's not coming back. I mean, I pray I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. All right. Tommy was on the podcast with me yesterday, and I think you'll want to hear what he thought. Nobody knows in this market Davey Martinez and Mike Rizzo better than Tommy does. Tommy has spent a lot of time with the learners over the years, usually antagonizing them. But he was on the podcast with me. You'll hear what he says next. Once I mentioned Laura Sigemund, she hasn't won a game since. She's about to lose the second set down 5-2, but that'll take it to a third set. Still, she makes things interesting for sure. All right, Tommy was on with me yesterday. Tommy knows Mike Rizzo well, Davey Martinez well. He has certainly spent a lot of time following this ownership group. So let's get to what Tommy thought about the firings of Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez.
Well, look, I beat this drum, and there's some people out there that don't want to hear it. They look at Mike's record of drafting, after they got good, and it hasn't been that good in player personnel drafting, okay? And they look at the way the team plays sometimes, particularly of late on the field, where they look like they're not disciplined, their head's not in the game, and that reflects poorly on Dave Martinez. I get all that, okay? And that's what fans can see, okay? But to beat a dead horse, they're both operating with both hands tied behind their back. They are literally handcuffed. If there's any town in America that knows the impact of bad ownership,
right,
it should be Washington, D.C.
Right.
I know it's a cliche. Lots of people say, "Oh, it's blame the owners." They don't spend enough money, but that's reality. That's the reality here. And so, the things that Mike has done bad, the things that Davey has done bad, they can't be disconnected to the lack of ability to do their jobs because of the Lerners' miserly way of doing business. I mean, it's just, you can't, I keep saying it, but I can't ignore it. I mean, this year they spent $65 million on their active roster. Okay, that's insane. And think about this. Think about when I talk about being handcuffed by the owners. There's just one example of, I'm sure, many, many more. Okay, in 2019, after the World Series, Ted Lerner signed Steven Strasburg to his 7-year, $245 million contract with Scott Boras.
Right.
He did so behind Mike Rizzo's back. Rizzo was frozen out of the deal.
Why?
Okay, because Rizzo never would have went for the deal. Mike never would have given Strasburg a 7-year deal, given how fragile he was. Probably less than half that, if anything. So they went behind his back.
Right.
And they made this deal. Now, Steven Strasburg is still getting paid $35 million a year. He's been retired for a couple of years and hasn't pitched in a game of any consequence since the World Series. Okay, that's $35 million a year. That's more than half of the entire active roster payroll the team is spending right now.
Right.
Imagine if they had that, if Mike had that $35 million to add to the $65 million, and then you're looking at $100 million, still paltry, but enough maybe to get a higher level of free agent than Paul DeJong or Josh Bell, guys like that, Michael Soroka, just to get a little higher level of free agent than that. That's just one example of countless things that the Lerners have done to basically handcuff their baseball operations people. So when we judge the baseball operations people, I don't think you can fairly judge them without knowing that they've got their hands tied behind their back.
By the way, the Nats payroll is 27th in the league right now this year. That's where it is among the 30 MLB teams. So,
and it's specific. It's specific, though. I mean, payroll can be interpreted. There's all kinds of different figures.
Right.
Okay. I am going with the active roster payroll.
That's where it is. Active is 27th. Total payroll allocations is 23rd.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. And last year it was $60 million, and the year before that it was $60 million.
Yeah. So I had Chelsea Janes from the Washington Post on the show, on the radio show today, and she said something that I thought was interesting. She said that one of the reasons that she was taken aback a little bit about what happened yesterday is that the action was swift and decisive, and that's, out of character for the ownership group, at least, these days. And I'm wondering if, any of that played into to your reaction, because many have claimed that they've been disconnected from the reality of the situation and even their part in it. Did you feel that way at all?
Not really. I've come to expect that. They have not been a very active ownership, except with the occasional statement, the occasional mealy-mouthed statement that we get from them. They don't sit down and do interviews. Okay, maybe in spring training, Mark will do an interview with the Post or something like that. No, that didn't surprise me.
Tommy, talk about the ownership, because when Ted died, Ted Lerner passed away in 2023. You have referred to, there's several people involved. We, as fans, Mark Lerner. That's essentially it. He is he's the top dog among the ownership group. But just describe the makeup of the ownership group, because I think that is a mystery to a lot of fans.
Well, I don't know the exact makeup, but the key decision makers here are Mark, his two sisters, and their husbands. Okay.
So Mark, two sisters, and Mark's two brother-in-laws.
Yes.
And they are all involved in the business?
Yes. Well, to some extent.
Okay.
They are all the decision makers. In other words, like, if anything significant has to be done, it should be done with them involved. And the divide, as I understand it, is between the two brothers, and to sell the team is between the two brother-in-laws and Mark, and Mark's sisters have sided with him.
Mark's sisters have sided with their brother, Mark.
Mark.
And yes, the two brother-in-laws want to sell, and the other three don't?
They have been. That has been the position.
Okay.
I have not had much contact this year with them as to whether that's changed, but traditionally that has been the way it's been lined up.
Why do the brother-in-laws have a say in this? Are they equity holders? Do they own?
Yes,
they do.
They're part of the partnership. Yeah.
All right. So
and that story I told about Strasburg.
Yeah.
Okay. There are so many more that we don't even know about, and everyone in the league knows this. Okay, they have as bad a reputation as I make them out to have. They have a worse reputation inside the industry of baseball.
Okay,
I'll be real curious how they go about hiring a general manager. Look, we know somebody will come take the job if it's offered. People came to work for Dan Snyder.
Yep.
So there'll always be somebody to take the job, but you're not going to get anybody good. And anybody who takes the job is going to know what Mike knew, that their biggest job every day is to manage upward. That's their biggest job, to manage above them, to manage the family, to manage the ownership.
Mike Rizzo's statement in a text to Barry's Verluga yesterday: the sun will come up tomorrow. That's the job. I had a great run. Navigated that ownership group for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Have you?
And here's the other thing.
Yeah.
This will be the first time the Lerners have hired a general manager.
Right, because he was on Bowden's staff.
Yeah, and it was Stan Kasten.
Right.
Who brought Mike to Washington.
Right.
They inherited Bowden. They didn't fire him until he got caught up in the Smiley Gonzalez scandal. Right. And then Stan Kasten hired Rizzo to be the general manager. He had already brought him in as an assistant GM. So they've owned this team for 20 years, and they've never actually had to hire a general manager before.
Do they need to hire a team president who hires a general manager?
That would probably be a good idea.
Okay, you talked about their reputation within baseball. That leads me to this. They're either going to, it's one of 30 jobs, so somebody's going to take the job, just like they did with the football team. We understand that. But are they aware enough of the reputation that they have around the sport? And do you think that they'd be willing to change? Are they capable of changing and then, becoming, an organization that could attract the best of the best in terms of general manager candidates and pay them? And then the same would go for, the open managerial position at the end of this year. I mean, is there any, hope for Nats fans that this reputation is fleeting? And I know it's been around for a while, and that they come to grips with it and change.
I would be shocked if they did anything other than what they've been doing. Look, I mean, having a bad reputation in their industry is not anything new.
No,
for this family,
right?
Okay,
in their
right, in their respective businesses,
right?
That's not. So I don't see them saying, "Oh my God, we have to change our ways." Not these guys. Not these guys. I mean, the way they've gotten to this point, they're one of the richest owners in Major League Baseball. I don't know how much of a hit they've taken real estate wise, but I'm venturing it's a lot since COVID. But these guys changing, that would be a dramatic turnaround.
I know that we've talked about this in the past, but they did go through a period where they spent money on players.
Yes, they did.
And post 2019 winning the World Series, we had a pandemic. We talked a lot about that. Just the worst possible timing for a franchise that really needed the financial boon that comes with winning a World Series, especially when it's the first World Series. I mean, it's been nearly 100 years. And they
were dealt a bad hand.
A really bad hand. Then on top of it, the ownership's primary business was commercial real estate, and nobody was going to work. And then, they started to look to sell the team. So we've been in this sort of state of, will they or won't they sell the team? Then Ted Lerner passed away. Like, a lot of things have happened since 2019. What's the most impactful in terms of what's ultimately led to them being super cheap and 6 hideous losing seasons?
Well, you can't, and I said, you can't deny that when the Nats were drafting in the lower rounds, as opposed to the top 10 draft picks, when they were winning, their draft picks would be in the low rounds. And Mike Rizzo's department did not draft well in a lot of those years, and that wound up hurting them. But, this is what happens. If you're not a small market team, you have the ability to overcome your mistakes. That's why I always say small market teams can't afford to make mistakes. They make a big mistake, and it sets them back for years. But if you're at least a mid-market or mid to large market, you have the resources to be able to overcome your mistakes.
Right.
Okay. What happened in a couple of
did the Nats have the resources of a big market team at any point?
Not the Red Sox.
I know, but remember they had a bad Masson deal, so there was that part that played into it. But you're suggesting that they were a big enough market that they could have overcome their drafting and developmental, farm system mistakes.
Yes. The Lerners claim they've lost $100 million a year. I know for a fact that from 2017 to 2021, they got $300 million in Masson money. Okay. I know that period for a fact over that 5-year period. That's nothing to sneeze at. Last year, or 2023, they got $70 million in Masson money. That's more than what they spent on their entire payroll. So while it wasn't an ideal situation, to use it as a crutch like they did was disingenuous.
So who are they going to hire? They've got this Mike DiBartolo that's going to take over on an interim basis. Let me just start there. The timing of this, people seem to have a major problem with it. how will it impact both the draft and then, by the way, trade deadline, to which Ken Rosenthal said, if they let DeBartolo be bold, this might be the time to move Mackenzie Gore. He's in the same situation, same year of the Soto deal.
He makes a good point. He makes a good point, but that would hurt the learners. The learners have gone on record and say that they think they're close to competing. Okay, they think that they're very close to competing, and then to trade your best pitcher when you've been telling people you think you're close. No, they won't do that. Remember, another example of what they did to handcuff Rizzo. In the 2018 season, Bryce Harper's last year here as a free agent.
Right.
Rizzo had put together a good deal with the Houston Astros for a couple of prospects. A particularly good deal since Harper would only be a rental for the Astros that year. Okay. Rizzo had the deal done. He had his hand on the phone ready to dial. The learner said, no, don't do it. Don't make the deal. So they wound up getting nothing for Bryce Harper's departure.
Right.
I would think that Gore leaving would be that Bryce Harper fear. They'd be worried about what the signal it sends to their fan base. They've got very peculiar. They care about what the fan base thinks, but only what they want to hear, in very selective hearing.
Yeah, you've said that before. You've said that they do care about what people think about them, but they also kind of lack real reality in terms of how people do think about them. Like, they only want to hear the things that are nice about them, or that's all they hear.
This is what we've encountered with so many other people.
Yeah.
In positions of power in sports.
Snyder.
The value of having a voice that will tell you what you need to hear is immeasurable, and few owners in any sports seem to have them.
So what are they going to do now? Mike Rizzo's gone. Dave Martinez is gone. They'll have an interim GM. They already have that. They'll have an interim manager named at some point during today because the Nats are off tonight. They play tomorrow night in St. Louis. As of this recording, they have not named an interim manager. When we get to the end of this season, who are they going to hire? Do you have any names that you're going to write about or that you've thought about? Are they going to be able to attract anybody? What are they going to have to pay? Will they be willing to pay it? They'll get somebody to do the job, but will it be better? Or are we doomed to be kind of what we've been here, which is a big market team, not LA, New York, Boston, Chicago, but certainly a bigger market team that operates as if it's small to mid-market?
I don't know who they're going to hire to manage the team. Again, the learners are cheap. They don't spend a lot of money on their managers. Okay, so that's going to come into play. And if they do this right, the general manager, whoever it is, will hire the manager. I mean, that's always the right way to do it.
Right.
So, and I don't know who, there's a couple of candidates that would be out there who would be, like I said, Dan Snyder got people to come work in Washington. So there's people who would take the general manager's job who are smart people who think, well, I can manage them. I can handle the ownership. So but as far as candidates, I don't have much to offer you.
I mean, this is a future of watching James Wood turn into a superstar and then end up in New York or LA, right?
Yes. Scott Boras candidate.
Speaking of James Wood, named to the All-Star team along with Mackenzie Gore.
Yeah. Yes, that was good. When you're operating on such a thin dime, like Mike Rizzo has done, putting together the team, particularly this year, You have to have some guys who have career years that you pick up, or at least good years, like a Josh Bell or some of the other free agents. Like Michael Soroka was basically the only starting pitcher. The Nats wanted to add a veteran starter. They could only afford Soroka, who got $8 million for a one-year deal, and they only got him because he wanted to be a starter. He's coming off a series of injuries, had been a reliever for a while in Atlanta, wanted to go back to being a starter, and nobody would offer him a starting job. The Nationals were the only team to guarantee him he would have a chance to start. So for 3 innings, and when he starts, he looks good, and then he falls apart.
Tommy, how did they manage with the Lerners as owners to have an 8-year run from 2012 through 2019 where they were in the postseason 5 times? They won more games than anybody in Major League Baseball with the exception of the Dodgers, and they won a World Series. With ownership like the Lerners, how did they have a run like that?
Well, they did have, Scott Boras was their their adopted son. Okay, they developed a close relationship with Boras, and Boras saw a place where his number 1 draft pick, Strasburg 1 year, Bryce Harper the next, would have a place to basically, become stars. Okay, and Jason Worth, one of his clients as well, could have a chance to have a big payday and help change the franchise. So Boras and the Lerners became very tight in the early days of the Lerners ownership. And he convinced them to spend money on his clients, I might point out. I'll give you an example of another thing that the Lerners did. I forget what year it was. Might have been 2013 or something like that. But it was, I'm looking it up right now as we speak.
Okay.
But in 2013, what's his name? Who was the closer before? Drew something?
Oh yeah, the one that melted down in Game 5 against the one from
a blank.
The one from Stanford.
Right, but he was their closer going into 2013.
Right.
Okay. But he had a good year.
True story.
Melted
True
down.
story.
Yeah, but did not play well in the postseason.
Right.
Okay. Ted Lerner called Mike Rizzo one day in the winter and said, "I got you closer." Okay. Rafael Soriano.
Yeah.
A Boras client made the deal, didn't tell Rizzo. Their closer, the general manager, had no input whatsoever.
Yeah, that's not good.
No.
Not good at all. They had something going right there for a while. Rizzo was doing something right. I remember, this was thought to be a pretty good organization with a good farm system, the likes of Jordan Zimmerman and Anthony Rendon and others. And you don't end up with the second best record over an 8-year period without doing something right there for a while. So it hasn't always been what it's been here in the last few years.
You're right. I mean, they had a lot of things. Like I said, a lot of things have to go right when you're playing close to the vest. Okay, they got Mike Morse for nothing from Seattle. He turned into a big home run hitter.
Yeah.
Okay, 30-plus home runs for them. Okay, they got Tanner Rourke for nothing in the trade for Christian Guzman. He became a 15-game winner. So he had a couple. The Gio Gonzalez deal, he gave away a bunch of prospects, none of them turned out to be anything, and Gonzalez wound up being a 20-game winner.
Yeah,
so
right.
A lot of things went right
From the A's,
just like they do for any front office. But they're playing, but they're playing so close to the vest now that everything has to be right. There is no room for mistakes, and every team makes mistakes. But some teams say, "Okay, we made a mistake. Let's fix it."
Yeah, we went from understanding what the pandemic meant to the 2020 and 2021 season to then, that horrible season where they, won 55 games, but then the Soto trade, which everybody, congratulates Mike Rizzo on, the players that he was able to bring back from that trade, James Wood, the two All-Stars for starters, Mackenzie Gore and James Wood. And it just seemed like starting in 2023, I remember, Rizzo being, on a show somewhere saying, we're 2 years, we're 2 years away from contending for a wild card spot in the National League playoffs. And he thought that first year would be 24 and then maybe, this year. And certainly wasn't this year.
They won 71 games last year.
I know.
That's more than what people thought they would win.
Yep, it was,
and
I think the last 2 years were over the total, yeah.
If he had been given the payroll to add a higher level of free agents around those young players, they might have won 80 games last year. Okay, now, but with all that said, this year's roster, the expectations among baseball experts, the Nats were a 68-win team.
Yeah.
At the most.
Yep.
So, despite the excitement out there, the experts did not see that based on the roster they put together. The news is broken that the Nationals have hired Miguel Cairo as the club's interim manager.
Yeah, seeing that.
He has been the team's bench coach since 2024.
Okay. What do you know about Miguel Cairo?
Not much. Not much. I mean, he's a friend of Davies.
Yeah.
He was the bench coach for the White Sox. I mean, I don't know much about him.
Will Rizzo get hired by somebody?
Well, it's interesting. I talked to Mike briefly just to see how he's doing. He didn't really offer anything in terms of what his future might be. Yeah, I think he could get hired to a number of GM jobs that if they became vacant. I also think if he wanted to, he could do well in the media because I think he's pretty good with the media. I wouldn't be surprised to see Mike show up on television in postseason baseball.
Yeah, I think he'd be good at that. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd be good at that.
Yeah.
All right. What else on all of this?
Well, I don't know much about Mike DeBartolo either. That's not a front office guy, the new interim GM, one of Rizzo's guys. Not familiar with him much at all.
Well, I'm going to summarize kind of my thoughts here to finish up this opening segment. I wanted to hear, all of what you thought beforehand, because this is an area that you are so much more familiar with in terms of the people and what's been happening over the last many years. But, netting it out, not that I needed yesterday to kind of come to the realization that this is true, but the arrow is not pointing up for this franchise, despite some decent things that are happening. James Wood, Mackenzie Gore, some decent prospects in the pipeline. But as long as the current ownership group is in place, and I don't want to sound like we all sounded for many, many years with Dan Snyder, that as long as Snyder owned the team, they were never going to win. It's not the same thing. I mean, first of all, different people, detestable people in the form of Dan First owned the football team for a long period of time and never had the success that the Lerners had for 8 years as the owners of this franchise. But I think, people that have done business with them. I know people in town that have done business with them, and it's always been about business. It's always been about the bottom line. This isn't always about winning. It is the way that they've run their own businesses. They have counted every single dollar, and they are very, very disciplined when it comes to the cost side and running the business and making sure that at the end of, a given business calendar, they made money or they stuck to the way in which they thought they could make money. And I think as long as that's the case, you're going to need that inside straight season. You're going to need, everything to kind of come together for them to, snag a wild card berth, in a given year. I mean, think about the competition. They are running a business. They are more mid to small market minded, and they're competing with the Mets and the Phillies and the Braves in their own division, let alone the Dodgers and the Cubs and other big spending National League franchises. So, absent that, season in which everything comes together, and they're healthy and they have a couple of outlier years from 2 or 3 players and 2 or 3 pitchers, and they win 86 games and they snag a wild card berth. Yeah, overall, the arrow just seems to be right now, as long as current ownership exists, not pointing up.
That speaks to the idea when you're a small market team, you can't afford to make a mistake that'll set you back. Okay, guys, teams like the Royals of Tampa Bay do a great job. You can't afford to make mistakes. You don't have that luxury. The Nationals aren't the Yankees, but they still should have been in a position to say, okay, we're not getting our players from our farm system. Let's go out and spend a little bit more money. Okay, I'm not talking about Jason Worth kind of money, Bryce Harper kind of money. I'm talking about mid-level free agents. Okay, not Josh Bell for 1 year, $5 million.
Right.
Okay, and they were certainly capable of doing that.
Mike wasn't surprised, right?
I didn't get this from Mike, and I know he really likes living in Washington.
Right.
He loves the area.
Yeah.
He's established some deep roots here in D.C. But on the other hand, there has to be a sense of relief for him. I don't know about Davey so much, but I always thought that there was a sense of fatigue that had set in, like they were just fighting against their own team instead of fighting other teams. They had to wake up every day to fight against their own team, and I think that took its toll on both of them.
Right.
Because Davey never gave a hint that he was unhappy with the owners. Once in a while, he would use the word, and this was the key word. They both used it. Hopefully.
Right.
They would once in a while they would occasionally say, "Hopefully we'll be able to spend money. Hopefully this. Hopefully that." When it was totally in their control, there was nothing to hope for except that their owners would do what they're asking.
All right, that was from the podcast yesterday. The news about the interim manager broke, obviously, during that. When we come back, Grant Paulson will be our guest. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980.
All right, some updates from Wimbledon as Taylor Fritz has defeated Karen Khachanov in a tiebreak to advance to the semifinal. He will face the winner of Cam Norrie and Carlos Alcaraz, which gets underway shortly. And Arnya Sabalenka is currently tied with Laura Sigmund at 1 set apiece. And American Amanda Anasimova takes on Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova at after this game. And the NBA, Devin Booker signed a 2-year, $150 million extension to stay in Phoenix. Paolo Banchero signed a 5-year rookie max extension with Orlando worth up to $287 million. And the Pacers confirmed that Tyrese Halliburton will miss all of next season with a ruptured Achilles tendon. The Nats. New era begins tonight in St. Louis. Former Nats bench coach Miguel Cairo will make his managerial debut with the team today. 7:45 is first pitch, and Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 7:15. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
All right, I've got some good news and I've got some great news. The good news is that Amazon Prime Day is here. The great news, this year you'll have 4 days to find deals on all your favorite things. Shop Prime Day now through July 11th at Amazon.com. I will keep you posted on this tennis match. They're in the third set, and this woman, Laura Sigmund's up 3-2 on the number one seed, Sabalenka, which ESPN, and I think it's the USTA, the tennis group, continues to not identify Russian or Belarusian players with their flags or their country origin. That's been going on now since the beginning of that war. I don't know. It's sports, but apparently, politics seeps into sports. It happens sometimes, but we're not going to talk about politics and sports right now. We're going to talk Nats and then some football with Grant Paulson, of course, the co-host with Danny Rouillet on the Grant and Danny Show, 2 to 6:30 every day on 106.7 The Fan, our sister station. I obviously thought about you. I did not get a chance to listen to you yesterday, but I really wanted to hear what you thought about what happened on Sunday after they got swept by the Red Sox, the firing of Rizzo, the firing of Davey Martinez. But before we get into kind of the granular, I wanted to start with just a big, macro, big picture question for you, which is, have we gotten to the point, Grant, with the Nationals that we got to with our favorite football team, which is, as long as current ownership continues to own the team, it's going to be a long shot that they can actually create, long-term sustained success?
So, Kev, I would say yes, with the caveat that we have seen this ownership group operate differently, albeit in its previous iteration before the death of Ted Lerner. And so I kind of look at the Lerner ownership group with two eras, right? There was when Ted was running the show, and even in the end there, when he wasn't all that healthy but was still with us, they operated very differently than since he has not been around and sadly now is no longer with us. And that's because there is some disagreement, from what I've been told for a long time, within the family and who's now left to run the team as to how involved they want to be and whether they want to own the team or whether they don't. And you've got Mark, who's sitting knee to knee with Mike Rizzo on draft night over the years, who's driving down to Fredericksburg with people to go watch James Wood after they trade for him, who's clearly very interested in owning. And I don't know, how prevalent that feeling is within the rest of the family. So everything that happens over there is a debate and is a drawn out conversation, and it's very problematic. So I would say yes, with the status quo currently of how ownership operates, and the infighting might be too strong, but just the different pages that everybody's on, the team's handcuffed, and it is going to be really, really hard. You're going to have to, like we said with Dan Snyder for a long time, luck box your way into a run, so to speak. But there is a path where they could decide at some point that they want to do this thing for real again and spend and get engaged and get invested. And we've seen them do it at a high level. We never saw that with Dan, and I don't think it was possible.
Yeah, before we get to that and whether or not you think it's realistic that they could revert back to pre Ted Lerner's passing the way they operated, isn't it just so much harder? 162 games, no cap. You've got the Braves, the Mets, and the Phillies in your own division, the Dodgers and the Cubs and others in your own National League. Doesn't it make it even a longer shot that you could hit the inside straight and win 87 and qualify for a wild card in that sport more than it is in the NFL?
Yeah, I would say so. I think you're onto something. It's much harder to keep up with the Benjamins when you're not. When I say spending and investing, everybody just thinks I mean going out and getting free agents. And that's part of it. That's a big part of it. You need to pay your players. You need to have talent, right? Everybody talks about these small market teams that are annually competitive. A good example would be the Tampa Bay Rays,
right,
who are right now within 4 games of the top of the American League East and a half game of the Yankees. And to your point, that's a division theoretically, although I think the NL East is even supercharged from this with Steve Cohen and Phillies ownership. But were the Yankees and the Red Sox and even Toronto, who tried to sign Shohei and tried to sign Juan Soto and have given out big contracts, like those teams are going to spend, and Tampa Bay is constantly in the mix. But when you really peel back the layers on teams like the Rays and the Guardians and the Brewers, who do things really well on shoestring budgets, they haven't really won anything. I mean, there is still a line of delineation between the haves and the have-nots and the teams generally that have a really good chance to win. And there's kind of a threshold with which you have to spend. But the one point I want to make really quickly is, because I realized after the show yesterday, we left this on the cutting room floor, so to speak. I think when we talk about investment, or at least for me, when I talk about spending, it's not just on the players. There was a piece I'm sure you saw in the Post last week where the Nationals do not have this state-of-the-art hitting equipment that Alex Call and some of their players wish they had. And this technology has now been used by most of the teams in baseball for 5 years. And Mike Rizzo came on 106.7 The Fan with the Junkies last Wednesday, and they asked him about not having it. And he said, well, we're getting it. We wanted to make sure it worked. And he made he gave a reason or gave an excuse, whichever you provide, for why they didn't have it. But there's teams that have had this technology for 5 years. And this, to me, is just one example of what I perceive to be, I could be wrong, many areas where they are deficient when it comes to technology and data and the types of things that you need to have to keep up now. I remember years ago having a conversation with somebody after I had gone and seen the Wake Forest pitching lab, where they churn out some of the best arms in America and turn decent college pitchers into top 5 picks now, year in and year out. And I'm asking the Nats if they have some of this stuff, and they didn't. Now, most teams at the time that Wake Forest was cutting edge didn't. But another conversation I remember, the Giants were pretty advanced, and they used these, this is super nerdy, but like these biomechanics plates early on, or like pitchers' feet would land, and you could, based on the technology, figure out like movement and how to keep guys healthier. And I asked the Nats about it, and the person I talked to kind of scoffed and was like, no, we don't have that. And I'm like, well, you don't want that? They're like, of course we want that. But the little things like that matter, and they add up. And that's the stuff we don't often talk about under the hood that I think is also
that's not
very
mindset.
relevant.
That's whether or not they're willing to spend for it.
Right. And look, to the Lerners' credit, and I don't get to talk to anybody from ownership ever. That's a big problem. Nobody does. There's very little transparency. There will be no press conference, after a GM and a manager are fired in season. But I will say, to defend them in some way, it is possible that as an older school executive, especially early on, Mike Rizzo's leaned a little more on Mike DeBartolo's taking over now, who's a data and R&D guy. But it is possible that for a long time, the Nats weren't pressing for these things. Maybe Rizzo didn't as urgently want some of these things that, say, like an Eric Neander who runs the Rays might. Maybe Rizzo was, I'm making this up, but perhaps he was more inclined to spend on advanced scouting and eyeballs and people traveling. And if it's Neander, they're going, no, we need this equipment. That's what I don't know. But I can tell you there are plenty of examples over the years that I have heard where there were things that they were trying to get and implement, and it took a really, really long time,
right,
to the point where sometimes you're years behind other teams before you do.
All right. Ownership obviously has a lot to do with their current, plight, and really the plight of the last several years. But if you were just inclined to kind of look specifically at whether or not performance dictated this move, Rizzo and Davey getting fired, can you make the case? And if so, make it for both of them.
Yes, absolutely. You can make that case. I think Davies is way easier. The 2019 season was the exception for Davey Martinez. And specifically the second half of that year at 19-31, Kev, where I'm not sure how many managers in baseball would have been capable of winning that World Series. His positivity, his optimism, his day-to-day, the cliches and the stuff he puts on the wall that you and me and a lot of people that aren't in athletics for our life kind of roll their eyes at. All of those things really
Tell
did
the truth
allow
Mondays.
Exactly right. Yeah. The hip parade, Jim Zorn stuff,
Yes.
right? That stuff is how and why they turn their season around. And I remember writing a piece years ago for The Athletic where I talked to not just players and coaches on that staff, but people that have known Davey Martinez since he was a player years and years earlier. And he was kind of the perfect guy for that role. I think we talked a few weeks ago when he was in trouble, and I said, 21 hours a day, I think he's a really damn good manager. He's a manager of people. He's okay in game. I don't think he is particularly great or terrible. But what I would say about Davey is he inherited a Ferrari. They disappointed in his first year. His second year, they won a World Series. COVID happened in 20. I kind of give him, a pass. The 21 season was a huge disappointment where it all blew up and they started trading pieces off. And from 22 on, he has been basically given a, somewhere between over the years, a 65 and 75 win roster to be a losing manager. But if you look at the ledger, there's a season on there where they were in the postseason and there's 0 division championships. So these jobs are not had forever. You could pretty easily make the case, especially with them going in the wrong direction, the constant base running blunders with no adjustments, the constant defensive woes. That one's easy for me. And frankly, I don't even know how much time needs to be spent on it because this could have happened at any point this season and it would have made sense.
And probably would have happened much sooner in other markets, don't you think?
Totally. Yes,
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. For 2 reasons. One, I think in other markets, there are higher expectations because there's like 5 markets that would rival Washington right now in terms of payroll, commitment. Like their total in among odds makers in Vegas was 70.5 wins this year. Like I had someone calling yesterday and say, well, you guys would give him so much more of a hard time, and the New York radio or the Boston radio would be killing him right now. And I said, yeah, he'd have a $200 million payroll and a bunch of stars, and they'd be underachieving. This is not that. He's going to the bullpen and deciding between bad option A or bad option B, and bad option B is doing worse. So it is a little bit different. But yes, he would not be here because there just wouldn't be a 5-6 year window where they go, well, we'll see. Let's trot this group out there.
So what about Rizzo?
So Rizzo's more interesting. So obviously the architect of a World Series champion, which you could kind of go on a run and that could happen and you could live off that for years. See Mike McCarthy, who's still talking to his teams about that time he won a decade ago. But it was not just that. It was the best team in the National League from 2012 to 2019.
Right.
And it was a proven, at one point, I would say right around the World Series, if you polled baseball people, Mike Rizzo's one of the more respected executives. I don't know that Davey's ever been that guy. And that's where with Rizzo, it's more complicated. Now, you said to make the case for why he'd be out, and it's pretty simple. Since the World Series, while I think the rebuild, thanks to the Soto deal, actually went very solidly without the reinforcements needed via veteran acquisition, the draft history is abysmal. The player development history is not good enough. He's always made up for that with great trades. And so he's been able to duct tape over and kind of mask those deficiencies with really a two-pronged approach. The trades, which he's as good at as anybody in maybe the history of the sport with his track record, and
Really?
the money that they spent.
Hold on for 1 second.
Yeah.
Mike Rizzo's one of the best, if not the best, when it comes to trades in the history of the sport.
Well, I'll say this. Since I've covered the game or been around the game in 20 plus years, I'd stack his track record up with anybody's in terms of trades. Yeah. I mean, just to run through some of them, the Soto deal is the greatest return of all time. So you start with that. Now, he's also the guy that probably traded the best player at his age of all time. So you need to get a good return, but they've already got 3 All-Stars and they should have 4 All-Star appearances between the 3 of them. And that's without Hassel, who's going to be an everyday big leaguer at some point, and Susana, who throws 101 and will ultimately be a closer probably, even having gotten to the big leagues. But when you run through the list, I mean, the Trey Turner, Joe Ross return for Steven Souza is an all-time return. Then there's little moves like Matt Capps for Wilson Ramos, who became their perennial catcher and an all-star. They got Doug Fister by trading a couple of Jags at one point in time. They traded a kid named Alex Meyer, who they drafted out of Kentucky in the first round for Denard Span, who became a leadoff hitter. I mean, one trade. Now, he didn't bat 1,000. You know, the Keibert Ruiz, Josiah Gray return for Turner and Scherzer, well, probably not as bad as people think, because Scherzer was a rental. The market was down. You still give up a year and a half of Turner. You got a controllable catcher who started every season since, but he's not a good player. And Josiah Gray was a kind of a fluky all-star, frankly, who's been hurt since. That's going to end up looking like a deal where you needed to do better. But yeah, his trade history is pretty astounding with what he's been able to pull off. But it has masked one of the worst 15-year draft runs maybe over the last 30, 40 years for an executive too.
Yeah. But like you said, I mean, he has at least on his resume 2012 through 2019, in which they went to the postseason 5 times in 8 years, won a World Series, and won more games, I think, than any franchise in the sport other than the Dodgers. I think they were second to LA
Correct.
during that stretch. We're talking to Grant Paulson. Back to just kind of the last few years. What was more impactful to their current situation? The pandemic or Ted Lerner passing?
I'd say Lerner passing, with the information that I've got on how things currently work and just the structure now left behind with the family. I mean, the pandemic hurt because the family's in commercial real estate, and obviously their business took a substantial hit. And more importantly, I think directly, tangibly for fans, there was no celebration of the World Series. And the financials did change, but you were robbed of being able to be at the ballpark. All the benefits that you get from winning a title, they didn't really get. So that stinks. And normally there's money that comes in the following year as everybody's coming out to the
it's
ballpark.
a financial boon historically, especially when you win your first. They didn't reap any of that.
They got zero of it. But I would still say that based on, I mean, this is not just a baseball thing. Like the business part of the organization, you know, I'm hearing different people leaving constantly. I mean, just this week, I heard another name of someone who was a high-rising person who a lot of people felt like could eventually be named the team president, who you know, is not going to be with the ball club long-term. Like there are so many different elements to this with how it's going behind the scenes and the amount of good people that are leaving the organization. And it all goes back to the shift in structure post Ted Lerner, where there wasn't really a good plan. And as I said, I think you've got several family members who aren't on the same page as to what should happen. And do they want to own the team? Do they want to sell the team? And in a lot of ways, they're stuck in sports purgatory because nobody can figure out what to do next.
All right, so let's wrap it up because I do want to talk a little football. We're with Grant Paulson, of course. So will they change? Will they figure it out? Will they get it together? Will they get on the same page, or are we sort of doomed to this kind of, mid-market to even small market approach in one of the bigger markets in the league in terms of size?
I think to answer that, the last part of the question, I would say yes, very likely. Mid-market to small market operating is probably going to be the norm moving forward. But I don't think it necessarily has to be as bad as it's been the last couple of years. And I am actually hopeful that for two reasons, maybe things shift just a little bit. The first is maybe unrealistic, which is that in some way, like, you're shamed into making a change. And there's not really a scapegoat at this point where you make the GM change, you make the managerial change. This search is going to tell everybody everything. And I think if you don't do something exhaustive and swing for the fences and spend legitimate money on grown-ups to come in here, then I don't know that you're going to be able to pretend that you're super engaged or care a whole lot, or, that you want to win, right? If they just hire a retread manager who wouldn't have gotten a job otherwise, or a general manager that nobody thought was one of the high-rising execs in baseball, it's going to tell you a whole lot. So that's number one, is I think they could kind of pivot to now saying, hey, we were always willing to spend. The guys just didn't think we were ready, and now's the time. And they'll go out and get a player or two, and they'll bring in a real GM. And I think they can kind of save face a little bit in that regard. That's number one. The other thing is there is a CBA coming up at the end of next year, and there's a likely work stoppage. Some people are calling it an almost certain work stoppage looming in Major League Baseball. And I think there is a real chance that we're just seeing basically a dragging out of the clock, like a taking the air out of the football until then, and that maybe there would be a sale after that still. So I don't know imminently that, like, they're going to be the owners forever and ever. It's possible. But I think even if they wanted to sell the team, it would be really, really hard to do that because, as you know, getting someone to buy into a sports team shortly before you're losing games and time in your season would be a really, really tough ask.
All right, let's switch subjects. I think when I was on with you guys last week, I think you agreed with me that you feel, right, like I do, that Terry's deal will get done. Before camp, they'll come to an agreement and it'll get done. Do you agree with me on that or not?
How could it not, right? I mean, isn't that kind of, when you think about it, how you feel? Like, they preach every hour of every day about finding commanders. And they're drafting Johnny Newton out of Illinois, and they're bear hugging in the draft room because they found a commander, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Terry McLaurin is the lieutenant commander. You know what I mean? Like, he is the guy that the whole thing revolves around, and he is what you basically put on the board every morning and say, this is what we want you guys to be. And you've got him. And so I don't think you can preach all the other stuff, and then it's his turn to put his hand out and get paid and not do it, and keep preaching about finding commanders. So I just think it's inevitable.
All right. So if it didn't happen, I think it will too. I think it'll happen before camp. I think he'll be in camp day one with a new contract extension. But if it didn't, and we got into a holdout, which, by the way, would be the most off-season drama we've had, because there's been no quarterback conversations, there's been no ownership conversations, there's been no coach conversations. If Terry McLaurin ended up holding out because they didn't get a deal done before camp, people would start to take sides. So my question to you is, which side would you take, and which side do you think fans would take, Terry's side or the team side?
Fans would take Terry McLaurin's side. I think fans almost always side with the player. This is a little bit more nuanced because of the "in Peters we trust" fandom, and the fact that, correctly, as someone who wanted Adam Peters to be the GM long before he was hired and thinks he's really good, I think people have a lot of trust in him, and there is kind of a blank check they've given him. Now, fans did the same thing to Ron Rivera, lest we forget. In Ron we trust, back in 2020 or so. But I think the passion and loyalty to fans far exceeds that of the passion and loyalty to the suit-wearing, shirt and tie-wearing executive. And so fans will be on McLaurin's side. I wouldn't have a problem either way, honestly. In terms of picking a side eventually, I guess, I would pick maybe the organization side if I could find out what the money was. Like, here's what I would say. If Terry McLaurin's willing to sign at 32 or 33, which I perceive to be the market, well, then I'm on McLaurin's side because that's what it costs. That's what DK Metcalf got. That's what he should get. And let's move along. I don't think this is realistic, but if he wants 35 or 36 a year, if he wants Jefferson Chase kind of money, then I would side with the team because it's bad business to give him the contract. And it's only a few $1 million, but if you're not able to meet in the middle, to me, I would go as high as 33 and change for McLaurin. Anything more than that, it's an outrageous ask. And coming off of a career year, I think it's a bad time to get back into bed with somebody on a longer contract that's not going to be able to do that year in and year out. I wanted nothing to do with Daron Payne after his huge season, as an example. I think signing guys after their career years when there's a several-year norm is not the way to go about it. McLaurin was unbelievable. The further we get away from last season, the more we forget the postseason and the big catches and the touchdowns. I don't even know how replicable that is for a guy where it's not about running free and being open. It's contested catches. It's making ridiculous grabs in traffic. And so I think the team's doing the right thing with a hard stance here. I totally understand him. I don't know what the money is. So if he's asking for 30 and they want to pay him 24, they're wrong. If he's asking for 33 and they want to pay him 27, they're probably wrong. If he wants $35 or $36 million a year, that's insane.
Yeah, I think what's one of the interesting things, and I've talked about it a little bit here recently, and I think I might have the answer as to whether or not this is really about a massive divide or it's just about negotiating style. You know, this is the first real contract situation that Peters and Newmark and company have had. I mean, they extended Sam Cosmi, right before the season started last year, but that was not, an urgent kind of situation. They moved on from John Allen. This is urgent. This is high profile, and it's their first. And we may be learning that it's the style of this group to wait it out. It was the style in San Francisco, and Adam Peters may have brought that style here. And when training camp begins, we'll have a new deal and all will be well. And everybody will say, it was all about business and we love each other. But I have a feeling it may lean more towards negotiation style than a real massive divide or confrontation. But we'll see. But I am interested if there was a holdout. Go ahead.
No, I think you're totally right about that. I actually think that the chances of that are very, very high because it's not like there are certainly complicated negotiations where we don't know necessarily a player's value. I think the market has pretty clearly established about where Terry McLaurin should be. And I'm sure you've done this over the last several weeks like I have. But you go through the who makes what, and it is pretty convoluted at wide receiver because there are really good players who make less. Guys like A.J. Brown, are slotted lower than they should be. And then there's guys that shouldn't be making what they do that make a little more. What the Steelers did with Metcalf felt a little crazy to me. So that makes it harder. But it's almost – I comp it almost like to the draft slotting system where we can haggle over a couple of things, but we kind of know where you're going to end up. And to me, that's how I feel about McLaurin. I think 100% what's happening is just this is their way of doing business. But the last thing I'd say about that is, in business, and we know this, especially in sports, it's not always great to comp sports outside of athletics, but when you are Terry McLaurin, you do get a little more leeway and you're going to be treated, you should be treated, superstars, a little bit differently.
There's a bit of a fine line there. Here's the thing, though. You can't pay somebody in business or even in sports for past performance. You have to pay them for what they're going to provide you. And that's where 100%. It is legitimately tricky in that he's going to be 30. And then where does he really slot in among receivers? There's that part of it too. But no, I'm with you. Like, you can't make people believe that you didn't treat this guy with respect in the right way. Like, so here's that.
The example.
Yeah.
Max doing the exact same thing as you. He's going to hear from the boss sooner, right? Not to throw him under the bus. Me and the junkies aren't operating on the same rules. I do something, they do something. They probably have a little bit more credence or leeway or what have you. This is a situation to me where you got to be careful with a hard line if that's the play. This is your first chance to really show how you negotiate. But this is not Jaron Christian, to use a player from the past, right? I mean,
Wow.
so
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You got to be careful here with how you operate is all I'm saying. I think that this is being blown out of proportion. There's not a whole lot going on. Is there some acrimony on McLaurin's side? Probably. Is his agent trying to get out there that they're upset? Yes. Do I think early in training camp he's going to be at the podium talking about being a Commander for life, and Adam Peters is going to be giving him a big hug and saying how much he loves him with his chiseled beard and his nice jawline? I do think that's what's going to happen.
Thanks for doing this. I'll talk to you. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy. Be good,
All right.
Kev.
Grant Paulson, everybody, 106.7 The Fan, 2 to 6:30 with Danny every day. All right. Whose side would you take? Terry's side or the team's side if indeed it became a holdout situation at the beginning of camp? 301-230-0980. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. Over Sabalenka won in the third set 6-4. So Laura Sigmund from Germany, who's become I'm a fan of hers for the last couple of years. She sliced and changed pace and just drop shotted her way to a 1-set lead, and then she was up 4-3 in the third, and then Sabalenka came through and won it. But your boy won some money. I had 3 sets at plus 300 max at 3-1. And I had plus 6.5 games with Sigemund, and she ended up, losing by 4 games net overall. So that more than covered the plus 750 for her to win wager. So won money on her today, but I was rooting for her to win. All right, enough women's Wimbledon tennis, but it was a hell of a match with truly like a major overmatched situation where somebody with much less physically at 37 years old was able to, use her craftiness and her brains to push the number 1 player in the world to on the brink in the third set. All right. So I was thinking about this, and I think I talked about this yesterday. I think I brought it up with Max during a segment. We didn't take calls on it yesterday. Tommy and I talked about it a little bit yesterday on the podcast. I was thinking that if it actually does get to a holdout situation, like there really hasn't been, a major great player since Cousins, and Cousins, was a good quarterback. But the contract stuff hasn't been part of our, off-season discussion with, the potential for, 2 sides at odds and a potential holdout in a long time. I mean, I guess you could talk about the Trent Williams situation, but that situation was really different. We were talking about cancer and whose fault it was that it wasn't diagnosed correctly, et cetera. There was a lot going on there, but this would be a legitimate holdout. I mean, Terry's not coming to camp without a contract extension. He didn't show up for mini camp, so I would assume he's not going to come to training camp without a contract extension. I do believe that this current situation, which everybody's reported on, all the national guys have reported on, they're far apart. Terry's side isn't happy with the way negotiations have gone. That was Jeremy Fowler from this weekend. I do think there's a really good chance that this is more about how we're going to see Adam Peters and company handle these delicate contract negotiations stylistically. It's kind of the way they handled it in San Francisco. They waited it out. They thought waiting made more sense, perhaps created more leverage. And then ultimately they would get deals done. And so I think it's more about style than a massive divide. But let's just play the hypothetical July 8th sports talk segment game. What if we do get to the beginning of training camp and there isn't a deal and Terry holds out? We just talked about that with Grant Paulson, and Grant, added, and this is important, how much context we would have in the moment would matter in terms of how we feel, right? If Terry's asking for a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson contract, then that's just not where he is, both in terms of the type of player he is and where he would slot among wide receivers. And by the way, his age, both of those guys are 25 years old. And they are 2 high-level elite wide receivers who will probably be in the top 10 to top 15 of all players in the league. When we see, the top 100 list that the NFL.com players list, it's been coming out in, we'll get to that maybe next hour in terms of which players are on the list so far. I think they're into the 80s in the countdown from 100 to 1. But if we, had information that Terry was asking for, $35 million or more per year, and some sort of, 4-year, $150 or $140 million deal, I think that would hurt Terry with fans. But if we also found out, but you're flipping it around, that Terry was asking for a DK Metcalf deal, 33 million average annual, we'll stick to the average annual rather than getting into the years and, guarantees, the practical guarantees or the aggregate value of the contract. And, that he thinks he compares favorably to DK Metcalf, and the team is offering something close to, say, Brandon Ayuk, at 29-30 million, then maybe we would be, on Terry's side. So when we get there, if there's information, and by the way, you won't always be able to believe some of that reporting, that would perhaps really impact the way we thought. But right now, I'm just curious, first blush, if we get to the July 22nd, the opening of camp, July 22nd or 25th, 22nd is rookies, 25th is veterans. I think that's what it is. Anyway, if we get to that and there's no deal and there is a holdout of Terry McLaurin, whose side are you going to be on? 301-230-0980. I'm going to tell you right now, I think I'd be on the team side. I think this is a delicate contract. We talked about it right from the beginning when the first report came out that Terry wasn't happy with the way things have gone. By the way, he hasn't, asked permission to seek a trade partner. We haven't gotten that. I don't think we'll get that. It doesn't seem like his style necessarily. It might be the agent's style. Who knows? But I don't think we'll get that. I do have a lot of benefit of the doubt and a lot of equity that they have built up with me over a year. I mean, going into this era, I was benefit of the doubt, Kev, because it had been so long with, not being able to give this organization, anybody in it, the benefit of the doubt. They never earned it. And it was like, let's see what happens with Josh Harrison, with the ownership group. And then, and then they hired Adam Peters. And then they hired Dan Quinn. I think they had a really good, those were the first big moves because 2023 was not their team. They couldn't put an ownership imprint on that particular team. We had to live out the Ron Rivera 2023 experience with Sam Howell, et cetera, in that just horrific season. But right when it started, it's like they got the top GM candidate. They got a head coach that they really wanted. Yes, that's who they really wanted. And by the way, what a staff and what a front office. And so, benefit of the doubt for me also took place when they drafted Jaden Daniels at number 2, because that's what I wanted them to do. And then all of a sudden, by the way, in the first year, they win 12 games, 2 playoff games, and they're within 60 minutes of going to the Super Bowl. So I would trust what they're doing. Now, some might say, you haven't been overwhelmed with their offseason. No, I'm going to take each move and I'm going to give you my thoughts on each move. And there isn't anything that they've done defensively that says to me, wow, they added talent that will upgrade the defense. And that was the biggest issue last year. Now, I do give a lot of room for the possibility of year 2 in the same system with the current players and the few players that they've added for the defense to improve. I mean, defense just behaves that way. There's not a lot of, there's just much more variance year to year with defense than there is with offense. But I don't want them to set a bad precedent with a 10, 15, 20% above retail deal. This is a tricky deal because of his age and because, as I've said before, Terry's a top 10 receiver. He's not a top 5 receiver. He just isn't, in my opinion. When you finish 19th in receptions, 15th in yards, 32nd in average yards per catch, you're not a top 5 wide receiver. You just aren't. He had his best year. He had 13 touchdowns, second in the league to Jamar Chase. He is great with contested catches. He's great in the clutch. I love Terry McLaurin. He's a really good wide receiver. We've been through this a million times. He's not Chase. He's not Jefferson. He's not A.J. Brown. He's I mean, I used to think he was every bit of CD Lamb. I still do. I think CD Lamb's overrated. I don't think he's Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't, I think he's in that category of, there are like 7 to 10 guys that are somewhere between, 7 and 14, somewhere in that range, which is fine. It's a loaded position in this league. It's incredibly deep. The DK Metcalf deal was an outlier. To give him $33 million a year. Now he's younger. He's 2 years younger than Terry, 2.5 years younger. To give him, 4 years, $33 million average annual. Now they gave him $60 million guaranteed, just so everybody understands about the guaranteed money with Metcalf's deal. But the average annual seems a little bit out of whack for DK Metcalf. Although I'm a DK Metcalf fan, I think he is capable at times of dominating a game in the same way the bigger, stronger receivers do it. A.J. Brown does it, on occasion. Mike Evans does it on occasion. But I think I would trust the team, and I would be on the team's side to do the right thing. I would also, day by day, be open to changing my mind, because I will tell you this, that what Grant and I talked about at the end is important here. You don't want your first big contract situation to be this tricky situation, because he's 30, going to be 30. Where does he really slot? But at the same time, it's Terry McLaurin. This guy is first class. He is a leader. He's so respected by everybody in that organization, everybody in that locker room. You can't, and I don't think they would treat him poorly in negotiations. I don't think that's the case. But you can't leave with the perception that you're not taking care of him. So it makes it hard. But I think to start, I would be on the team's side, and I would trust that the team knows what it's doing. Where would you be? 301-230-0980. I see we have a full call list. So everybody stay there. I'll start taking your calls next. If we got, total hypothetical, to a holdout situation at the beginning of training camp, whose side do you think you'd be on to start? Terry's side or the team side? It's the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980 and the team980.com.
All right, some updates from Wimbledon as Taylor Fritz has defeated Karen Khachanov in the tiebreak to advance to the semifinal, and Arnya Sabalenka defeats Laura Sigmund in 3 sets to move on to her semifinal. And in the NBA, Devin Booker has signed a 2-year extension worth up to $150 million to stay in Phoenix. He will be there through the 2030 NBA season. And Paolo Banchero has signed a 5-year rookie max extension with Orlando worth up to $287 million. And the Pacers confirmed that Tyrese Halliburton will miss all of next season with a ruptured Achilles tendon. The Nats, a new era begins tonight in St. Louis as former Nats bench coach Miguel Cairo will make his managerial debut for the team today, filling in after Davey Martinez and Mike Rizzo were let go by the Lerners. Tonight, 7:45 is first pitch, and Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 7:15. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1, and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the streams and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
You know what's out on Netflix right now? The new quarterback series. You know, they did the quarterback thing a few summers ago with Mahomes, with Marcus Mariota, and with Kirk Cousins. It's out again this summer, and it came out, I think it dropped last night, and it's Burrow, it's Cousins, and who's the third quarterback? Goff. They're the three. Be interesting to see the Joe Burrow part with Cincinnati rolling up massive numbers all year long and the defense not being able to get off the field. It'll be interesting to see Jared Goff in the playoff loss against Washington. And then Cousins with all the issues that he had after a great start to the season in Atlanta. We'll get to some of what's out there sort of preparing in prepping and promoting the Netflix quarterback series on the show next hour. But right now, just first blush, if it came to a holdout, training camp, by the way, 18th for rookies, 22nd for veterans, my fault. If we got to July 22nd, veterans report for training camp, and Terry is a holdout because there's no contract extension. Without getting into what we would know and wouldn't know with respect to what the team's best offer was, what Terry was looking for, whose side do you think you would be on? I think I'd be on the team side to start with. They've built up a lot of trust with me, a lot of equity with me, and I would trust that they would be handling it the right way. Max, do you have a gut on who you'd be siding with in that moment?
So my gut tells me it all depends on that big number that gets reported. Because if it's close to DK, like you said, where it's going to be like 33, 32, pay him that already. Like sign that with the quickness. Now, if he wants like 35, 36, we got to figure things out. We got to dial it back a little bit. But it all is number dependent. But if that number comes out to like what we expect it to be, the DK Metcalf number, I'm on Terry's side.
Yeah, let me just say, with respect to like the difference between 33 and 35 or 36, that's not really it for me. What it would be, you know, is Terry looking to get paid like Jefferson and Chase? Okay, Jefferson makes $35 million, but was given $110 million in practical guaranteed money, okay, over a 4-year deal. Jamar Chase's deal, $112 million in guaranteed money. CeeDee Lamb, $100 million in guaranteed dollars. You know, if he's looking to get paid as if he's a top 3 or 4 wide receiver in the league, that's an issue. If the team's trying to pay him like he's, you know, somewhere between 10 and 15, that would be a problem. Because remember, today's overpayment is always tomorrow's bargain when we come to contract talk. But Terry's age is a factor in this. I just think at the beginning, I would be on the team side. And I just don't think they're going to blow this. You know, I think they will handle it the right way. There are smart people in the organization. There are guys that have been doing this for a while, not as the number one guy in Adam Peters' case, right? So there is that. He did work for John Lynch and he worked for others. And they've got other, you know, experienced contract people in the building. I like their overall team. I don't think they'll blow it. That would be the side I would be on from the jump. What about you guys? 301-230-0980. Let's start with John in Rockville. John, if we got to a holdout between Terry and the team, what's your gut now? Whose side would you take?
Yeah, I'm going to start off with siding with the team. I do want to preface this as I'm a Terry guy. I mean, if you watch his film, every single play, nobody plays harder on the field. I was actually just gifted a Terry jersey. But that being said, we got to look forward as an organization. 30 years old, I was looking at Julio Jones the other day. I mean, just looking at his numbers, his last 1,000-yard season was, I think, 31 years old. I mean, he's starting to get up there, right? So we need to draw that hard line and see where it is, right? And if he's not budging and if we're not budging, we got to move forward and see what the best path is to, you know, have a, you know, clean breakup and, you know, get assets to keep building and, you know, building the organization. I do think that, it's going to set us back for our short-term goals of being very successful next year if we lose Terry. So we got to think about that as well.
You're not going. He's not going to hold out once the season starts. He's going to play for the. I guess trade would become an option if it really became contentious, but he's under contract. And he'll be
still under contract.
There will be fines piling up that you can't forgive anymore per the per that last agreement between players and league.
Oh yeah. I was just talking in terms of getting a trade done before the season.
Yeah. I think the worst case is Terry just ends up playing in 2025 on the last year of his deal. I do not see trade being an option.
Yeah.
I think the team has leverage in that he's under contract. B, turning 30 years old next year, if there was an issue, they could use the franchise tag. Terry's got the leverage from some leverage in the fact that they really want him this year and they want him to be happy playing this year. And, there's this thought that he better get treated with a high level of respect in this negotiation. And, for the lack of a better description, he needs to be taken care of. All right, stay on hold. Sorry, I got to get to another break, but when we come back, I'll get to all your calls. Lap, Steve, Ryland, Joe, DC, Anthony, everybody, stay there. Simple question. If we get to a holdout on July 22nd, whose side do you think you'll be on? Terry's side or the team side? Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980, theteam980.com. You can also stream the show and watch it on the Team 980 YouTube page. When you get there, hit the subscribe button, please, and the like button. The heat and the humidity are back. You've got the AC running right now, full blast to keep your home cooler than it's been. It's probably because your windows are old and they're not insulated well enough. You should call Window Nation. Window Nation right now is offering 50% off on all window styles with 0% interest for 5 whole years. They've got energy efficient, top quality windows that'll keep your home cool without running the AC 24/7. Window Nation won't make you pay any interest until 2030, and they'll get the job done in a day or less. They'll leave your home looking better than when they arrived. Their installation crews have 16 years of experience on average. You can feel comfortable knowing your windows are installed correctly the first time. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't procrastinate another day if I could save myself from another month of living in discomfort. Don't miss out on Window Nation's biggest deal of the year. 50% off on all window styles with 0 interest until the year 2030. It starts with a free, no obligation in-home estimate when you call 866-90-NATION or visit windownation.com and mention my name. All right. 301-230-0980. If we get to a holdout between Terry McLaurin and the team, whose side do you think you'll be on in approximately 17 days? Veterans report for first day of training camp on the 25th. If there's a holdout, whose side do you think you would be on? I think I'd be on the team's side to start. Let's go to Lap. Lap, whose side would you take? Lap, you there? Hello, Lap. Did we lose Lap? Let's go to Steve. Steve, whose side would you take?
Hey, Kevin, how you doing? Good afternoon.
Good, Steve. How are you?
Good, man. Thank you. I would take Terry, just like you said, you trust the organization. I also trust who's been here for the last 6-7 years too. And it showed, nothing but, patience. Just came out and played. I would be on Terry's side. I would not overpay. I would put him anywhere between 29 and 31 million. T. Higgins is getting 27, and he's a number 2. Terry's our number 1. So I would pay Terry anywhere between 29 and 31 million. To piggyback off your other thing, I do not think he's better than CeeDee Lamb. And I think CeeDee Lamb is better than A.J. Brown. It's a difference between the two as far as how they do, as far as how, the teams use their receivers. But that's where I would put Terry. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks. Appreciate the call. T. Higgins is actually for, average per year, 28.75 million in his average per year. Terry, I think, is above that. I 100% for the same reason you think he is. I think he's there with Amon-Ra St. Brown at 30 million a year. I really do. I mean, again, we're going to quibble over $1 to $2 million per year over a 3 or 4 year deal. I mean, you don't want to set a bad precedent, but I think he's somewhere closer to 30 than even DK Metcalf's contract at 33. Just because the Steelers overpaid, if you believe they did, doesn't mean that Washington has to do it. 301-230-0980. Let's go to our guy Ryland in OKC. Ryland, whose side would you take, Terry's side or the team's side, if they end up having a holdout when camp starts again? I screwed up. It's the 22nd for veterans, 2 weeks from today. Whose side would you take, Ryland?
Morning, Kev. I got to go on the team side this day and age. When I was actually putting a couple of notes down for this call, I was writing Terry is the identity, but then I realized that he's not anymore. I think kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt in the past 6-7 years that he's been a part of this team, well, the majority of that was led by Dan. And when you think of this team's identity, before we get drafted number 5, it was Terry, right? Like it was character Terry might lose by 15 points, but we're going to win it maybe because Terry's on our team. But now it's Jaden Daniels and everything that he brings and he builds. I would love Terry to be a part. I've always been a Terry guy. It's been fun watching him, but like you say, he ain't Jefferson, he ain't Chase, and he's asking for that. He's got to be realistic too in his camp, because they got to know what they're building in Washington, and it's not going to be built around number 17. Unfortunately for him, it's Mr. Number 5. So I would like to see them make a good effort and kind of keep him for the culture standpoint. But I think, like you say, if you're going to overpay just because Pittsburgh did, well, you're going to hurt yourself down the road trying to negotiate with the number one when they're like, well, you paid Terry number 1 money and he was 30 years old and on his way out. So it's going to be interesting. But and then I like a little Debo Terry on a prove it year. I mean, talk about a Super Bowl, Kev. Come on, buddy.
Yeah, having them both on a prove it year. Yeah, I mean, let me just make one thing clear. Terry can't hold out, okay? He's going to be 30 years old, and you wouldn't be able to enter free agency next year if you don't play a certain percentage of the games for that contract to accrue. You know, you said something very interesting, and I'm glad you said it. I personally, before Jaden arrived last year, I would not identify anybody as the face of the franchise, you know, of the last 5, 6, 7 years. There hasn't been a face of the franchise on so many of these terrible teams. With that said, it doesn't mean that Terry doesn't deserve a lot of respect for how well he's played, given that they've had terrible quarterbacks, that the environment's been so dysfunctional, that he's conducted himself with such, you know, incredible professionalism, etc. But this franchise hasn't had a face of the franchise until last year. Jaden Daniels is the face of the franchise now. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. When typically your quarterback's going to be your face of the franchise anyway, if he's any good at all. They just haven't had that guy for a while. The fact that he is easily a top 10 guy, and I would argue a top 5 guy, he's the face of the franchise. Doesn't mean that you respect Terry any less or think of Terry any less, but I haven't, as a fan like all of you, I haven't viewed Terry as the face of the franchise. That's a pretty heady label. And when you stink as bad as this team has stunk, you know, up until last year, the face of the franchise is just dysfunction everywhere. Identifying him as classy, professional, productive in terrible circumstances, of course we did that, but there was no face of the franchise for several years. That's my opinion. I think younger fans probably viewed Terry as, that's my guy, because it was the only guy worth sort of, you know, attaching yourself to. Thanks, Rylan, as always. Let's go back to Lap. Lap, go ahead. Whose side would you take if we got to a holdout on July 22nd between the team and Terry? Would you take Terry's side or the team's side? Go ahead.
I'm going with the team side, man. I'm team guy first, even though I'm a big fan of Terry. Terry's getting old. You know, he's definitely deserving of his money, man. But he's got to be realistic, like the last caller said. You know, he's not in that upper tier. You know, Chase and Jefferson and those guys. So, but I think they need to come to some agreement, because he is a fan favorite. Who like him, but it's just that age factor. You know what I'm saying? And you know what I don't get, Kevin? It's like when you get to guys, they're up in their years. Like we always got to continue to draft and bring other pieces and add that position, because you just never know what happens. You know, it's a business at the end of the day, and then, you know.
Your line's breaking up, Lap. Sorry, I got to let you go. But yeah, I get where you were going with that. And they did draft a wide receiver, the kid out of Virginia Tech, Lane. So we'll see. And they added Debo, and they're going to have to continue to, you know, add weapons. They drafted a receiver last year. Hopefully Luke McCaffrey makes a big jump this year. I want them to sign Terry to a deal that's fair, that is not a bad precedent setter. I don't think they will. I think Terry's deal will come in somewhere between 30 and 33 million a year. Some 4-year deal, which will look really big, 120 to 130 million in aggregate, but probably include, 60 to 70 in guaranteed money. I'm not worried about Terry McLaurin in 2025 or 2026. He just had his most productive year. He just proved what he can be when you give him, a legitimate quarterback. And by the way, also a legitimate offensive coordinator. I don't think that he's going to be falling off the cliff here in 3 years. But, if you were to get age 30, 31, and 32, 3 out of the 4-year deal, let's just say if it ends up being that, and that 4th year might be, I would imagine they're going to front load this deal and keep it away from the Jaden contract years. I think you're going to get that. I think you're going to get great performance out of Terry. There's no concern about what he's going to be. The concern is that you don't want to be in the business, especially with your first contract, of overpaying the market by 20%. Dan did that for the first 10, 11 years until Bruce got here. And it created, a terrible situation because every contract negotiation that followed ended up being a problem for them. They're going to have to deal with Tunsil next year. Tunsil's going to be a big contract discussion in the off season. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. If we get to July 22nd, 2 weeks from today when camp begins, and Terry's a holdout, whose side do you think you take? The team side or Terry's side? Let's go to Anthony in D.C. Anthony, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
So right now I'm on Terry's side, depending on the value that he's looking for. But let me ask you a question. In your opinion, what's the percentage of the team winning the Super Bowl with or without Terry?
Oh, it drops without him, but they're not going to be without him. He's under contract.
Well, stranger things have happened, but we hope.
True.
Let's just say we hope that he shows up. So my point is, if he comes in around 32, 33, they should run to the window to pay him. We talked about this before. There are always exceptions to the rule. Yes, he's 30, but he's never showed any sign of slowing down. He's not injury prone.
Right.
So I brought it up the last time we talked. Henry Ellert. Throw in Urban Fryer, throw in Jerry Rice. Extreme. Rice is extreme, but I'm just saying, well past their 30s, but extremely productive. And another thing, Noah Brown looks like he's going to be out for a while. You have no one better.
He does? Where'd you see that? I mean, I know that there was an injury in the minicamp, but where did you see that he's going to be out for a while? I haven't seen that.
No, I'm just going off what was coming out of the camp, the injury that he had. I haven't seen any update, but
I don't think that's the case. But anyway,
okay.
Look, I'm with you. I'm not concerned about his age 30, 31, or 32 season. By the way, you did bring this up the last time you called, and I remembered it because Henry Ellert, and I wasn't sure when he actually got here with Norv, but it was 94, and he was 33 years old at the time. He's one of the better route runners in NFL history. And I'm not saying that from my opinion. Norv said that over and over again, that Henry Ellert at 33 years old, and he played here for 4 seasons. He played through his age 36 season.
Fryer was another one.
Who?
Irving Fryer was another one.
Yeah. Fryer didn't produce, I don't think, what Ellert produced when he was here.
No, he didn't produce like that, but he was still very effective.
Yeah, he was effective. I'm not concerned at all about what Terry's going to give us. And by the way, if Terry ended up playing on the last year of his deal in 2025, and by the way, this works against him a bit because the team knows that Terry would be ultra professional if they didn't work out a deal, and he was upset that they didn't work out a deal. They still know that he's going to show up and he's going to give it all that he has, which, by the way, would benefit him too, heading into, a potential free agency offseason in 2026, although the team, I think, would use the franchise tag on him, especially if he had a good year in 2025. But you're not going to end up with, Terry being a problem because they didn't get a deal done. That could play into the team's positioning on this too, because he's such a pro. They understand that push comes to shove, they don't get a deal. They're still going to get the best of Terry in 2025. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah. Did you go ahead if you wanted to add something else?
Yeah, last thing before I go.
Yep.
Because he's your homegrown player, sometimes you got to go a little bit above and beyond.
I think there can be exceptions made too.
Because if he was an outside player, then no, don't overpay him. But he's your guy. Give him what he needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less about homegrown, less about your guy. It's the overall. What do you know about him? And you know a lot more because he's been here. I understand that. But what you really know is that Terry's an excellent wide receiver who is a, clear-cut leader and big-time pro. As you continue with, this culture creation, which, is only 1 year old. I mean, they've still got to continue the process of getting the right people in and keeping the right people. And he is certainly one of them. Let's go to Robert in Annapolis. Robert, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm not picking sides because I'm not directly involved, but I view it from what benefits a team. And by that, I don't mean management. I mean being able to keep current players and being able to bring in players in the future, let alone what you're going to have to do with your quarterback in a couple of years. The team is holding a winning hand, Kevin. Why should they draw any cards? They have McLaurin. I checked this a couple of days ago, actually, when you were talking about it. He's due about $16 million this year. He was prepaid about $5 or whatever from that bonus on the last contract. The tag next year, I think, for receivers is 24. They literally have him in their grasp, I guess you could say, for $40 million over the next 2 years. How is that going to benefit the team to pay him more than $30 million a year for 3 or 4 years? This is the advantage of having a Jaden Daniels. He can make other players what Terry McLaurin is. That's the advantage that they have now. So I just don't see how it. And you're right. He may hold out in camp.
The franchise tag, just so you know, is not whatever you said. It's going to be $28 million plus in 2026. You were probably looking at the 2025 numbers.
That could be all right, but what I'm still saying is there's no reason for the team to long-term him at over $30 million a year. It doesn't benefit the team in the context that I described. All this about him being a nice guy and a face of the friend, that's all wonderful stuff. But it's really what you're going to get on production. And as you said, it's what you're going to get out of him. And I'm not singling him out. This applies to any player, what they're going to do going forward. Look at the Bengals. They got 2 of the highest paid receivers. They didn't even make the playoffs last year, and their defense stinks, and they can't even bring in their best player. So, it depends on how the general manager's philosophy is running a team. You want this to whatever benefits your team long term, not to. We talked about this.
I agree with that, Robert, but I strongly disagree that it would be better for them to pay $28 million next year in a franchise tag, and it doesn't behoove the franchise to pay him $30 million or more a year. You are much better off having Terry McLaurin under a 3 or 4 year contract extension than you are having him play one season and figuring it out next. We know the pitfalls of going down the franchise tag path. Now, that was with a younger player and at a much more important position with a bunch of dummies, making the evaluation and then the decisions. But even with a guy like Terry, he's got 3 to 4, high-level years left in this league. There's no reason to think that he doesn't anyway. You've got to pay him, and you've got to keep him under contract and, not get into that, that 1 year. Because
You-
remember,
you don't-
28 million as a salary cap number next year would be a big number in 26. With a contract that averages 30, that isn't necessarily the cap number with the way it would be spread out.
Yeah, I understand all the cap ramifications, but you don't know what you're going to get from him or any other player going forward because there's too many unknowns in terms of let alone.
Yeah, but
injuries.
you're really confident you are going to get a pro. That's the thing about Terry, and this is where you're not guessing on what he's going to bring you. You may be guessing on when his talent will start to erode at age, but you're getting a pro's pro. I do not think letting him play out his final year of his deal is the way they want to go. I don't think that they'd have great leverage necessarily doing that. I don't think they want to get into that game of using a tag on him next year. With that said, if they're forced into it, he's going to play, on this final year. If he's asking for too much, I don't want them to go overboard either. This is it's not a needle in a haystack kind of a deal that you got to find. There's going to be a 31 to 33 million a year with 60 to 70 guaranteed. That's where it's going to come in. If he's asking for a lot more, then the team can't go to Jefferson Chase territory because he's just not them. Not to mention he's 5 to 6 years older. Let me move on.
Right,
Thanks, Robert. As always, let's go to G. G, go ahead. Whose side would you take if in 2 weeks we've got a holdout between Terry and the team?
Hey, Kev, when I used to collect football cards, man, I used to be psyched when I got Henry Ellett and Flipper Anderson card, man. It was my dogs, man. But, I'm always on the player side, man. The market value, he definitely worth $30 million, especially if people like Ayuk making $30 million a year. I want him to get his money. I'm tired of hearing he's not Jamar Chase or Jefferson. That's very true. But we've seen a big sample size from McLaurin play with grocery store clerks at quarterback. We never had to see Jefferson. They structured the whole offense off of getting Jefferson the ball. Jamar Chase got one of the best quarterbacks in the league in Joe Burrow. We've never seen them play with Sam Howell, have to play with Taylor Heinekens. We never seen that. So we don't know what they would have been in this situation. But we know what Terry has been. He's been a pro. Other than the bitching and moaning about Eric Bieniemy's coaching style, like he has been a consummate pro, a great culture guy, and also super productive on the field, which is most important. So the market value says he should get 30, 31 million. I want the people in the front office to structure it proper so we're not hamstrung. So when we do got to pay Jaden Daniels, we ain't got to figure out super calculus. And I'm like, man, get that man, pay that man his money. What my man KGB said on Rounders, Ken?
Yeah, pay that man
his money.
All right, man. Appreciate it, as always. If you're on hold, we'll take another segment here of calls. I see everybody sitting there. Whose side would you take, Terry's side or the team side, if in 2 weeks he's a holdout? Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com. There was a quote from somebody within the organization working on the new stadium deal that I will share with you before the end of this show. Not necessarily thrilled with the timing on the DC Council vote for obvious reasons. 301-230-0980. We're taking calls. A very hypothetical, but a possibility that in 2 weeks, when veterans report to training camp in Ashburn, there's no long-term deal done with Terry McLaurin. I believe that there will be one done, maybe right on the eve of camp or somewhere right around, give or take a day from that July 22nd report date for veterans. But if there is a holdout to begin camp, whose side do you think you would be on? Terry's side or the team side? I think to start with, I'd be on the team side. I would. I would trust that this brain trust that now runs the football operation, that they would be doing the right thing for not only the short term for the team, but the long term for the team. And I do think a deal will get done. Even if there is a holdout to start, I think we'll get a deal done at some point early in camp. Joe in Springfield's been on hold for a while. Joe, go ahead. Whose side would you take?
Hey, Kevin, how you doing?
Good, Joe.
So I was split down the middle with this. I'm with a little bit of Terry and also the team, but I actually changed my answer. I'm going with the team on this because this is a different front office. They're not going to rush to get it done or give a franchise tag or something like we've done in the past with Cousins. It's going to get done, bottom line. And I trust Adam Peters to do this because he's done this before in San Francisco and the deals were able to get done. Terry, let's say this, Kevin, Terry has finally got a quarterback. For the first time, he's going to his 7th season with the franchise. He finally has a quarterback, and we were literally 60 minutes away from going to the Super Bowl last year with Terry. I'm not saying Terry is one of the leaders on the team. Is he the leader going forward? It's Jaden Daniels, but Jaden Daniels, Kevin, if you think about it, Jaden Daniels doesn't want to be in the center of attention either because he just wants to focus on football. So it's going to get done regardless, but I'm leaning kind of a little bit towards the team because I trust Adam Peters in the front office. They're going to get this deal done. But bottom line, it's going to get done. And the fact people keep saying that it doesn't get done when the season's over, well, then you're not part of the team. You're on the bandwagon. It's going to get done regardless. Have a good day, Kevin.
Thanks, Joe in Springfield. Let's go to Skins Fan. Skins Fan, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin. First of all, thanks for having me on. I've been a long-time listener, but usually listen to you on delay from Richmond. So first-time caller. So appreciate you having me on.
It.
Love the show. And so I was thinking that a lot of the fans were going to be on Terry's side because they see Super Bowl in their eyes and they see kind of what's going to hold us back from the Super Bowl. But as you said, we have them for this year. So really, in my eyes, I'm looking at it, what is the market going to be the year after that? And I don't see any possible way that he's going for 31+ million on the open market. I think he's going to be more like a Davante Adams. And honestly, people say, look, he's a number one for us, but who's going to get a 31-year-old for 31 million to be their number one? I think he would probably go to somebody that's a contender to be their number two. I don't think he's going to get that 31 million on the open market. So I think if we give him 30, we're already overpaying. I think this is almost the opposite of the Kirk Cousins situation where the team was lowballing what the market was going to offer. I think we're willing to pay more than the market. And, if he's willing to think that he's going to get 30, close to mid 30s in the open market, then, so be it, I guess. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, like the deals, like Tyreek Hill's current deal at $30 million a year was done, a year and a half ago. So when he was 29 years old, but about to become 30, I guess.
Right.
The other deal out there, you look at Davante Adams, he's down at 22. Davante's, by the way, continued to be productive no matter who the quarterback has been. Davante Adams, let's not forget, 3 years ago, I think many people thought was the best wide receiver in the game. I don't know that Terry's ever come close. He hasn't to producing at Davante Adams' level, even when Aiden O'Connell was his quarterback in Vegas. But I think you're right about if he were on the open market right now, that it would be right around 30. It would depend.
Well,
Actually, I disagree with that. Because there are enough teams that don't have a number one that would pay up, big time. Somebody would give him
like a year from now too.
Yeah, but I'm saying if he were on the market right now as a free agent, somebody would pay him 33, 34, 35 million a year because they would be desperate for a number one. And Terry is an easy guy to overinvest in because of the kind of guy he is. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Let's go to DC.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, DC, go ahead. Whose side would you take, Terry or the team side?
Great day, Kevin. How you doing, brother?
What's up, DC? How are you, man?
Man, I'm excellent, man. I'm intrigued. All of the callers are saying all the right things, and I believe the point that you've been making, I know you say you side with the team, but it sounds like you side with Terry because we know what we have in Terry. And like you said, you're not scared of his productivity over the next 3 years. He didn't play as much in college, so I'm siding with Terry long as, like you said, the contract is in between 30 and 33 million because he's always exemplified a Redskin. He's always exemplified what a Washington football team member would be. And he's always exemplified a commander. Now that Jaden is the face of the league and Scary Terry has been able to unveil himself with a great quarterback, I don't think that his numbers will decline. It will be just as good as they have been this year. So I look forward to, like you said, it's going to get done. I look forward to it getting done and no holdout at all. And I'm on Terry's side. Thanks,
DC. By the way, let me be clear. I think my 2 weeks we could have a lot more information, and I could change my mind with more information. But if we don't have more information, and he's a holdout in 2 weeks when camp begins, I think I would be on the team side in that I would trust that the team's doing the right thing. Okay. With that said, it doesn't, it doesn't mean that I'm not wanting Terry to get a deal that's fair for Terry, fair for the team, and he ends up, being happy with a long-term deal. I feel comfortable giving him, a 3 or a 4 year deal. I don't think the production's going to slip. I don't want the team to do something that sets some sort of precedent that they're in the business of, overpaying the market. I don't think that's what they're going to do. I think they will find, a happy middle here somewhere. And I think it's going to end up being between 30 and 32 a year. It's 60 to 70 guaranteed, something like that. That's my guess. Let's go to JYD. He's been on hold for a while. JYD, go ahead.
Well, Kevin, it's like this. Peterson didn't have any problem in paying that defensive tackle that he got in free agency. He overpaid for him. So take $1 or $2 million from him and give it to Terry. That's the way we do it.
Well, you can't take it away from Javon Kinlaw now. But
he certainly overpaid him.
Well,
so
I thought $30 million guaranteed for Javon Kinlaw was a bit much. I did. Yeah. But they didn't. And, Javon Kinlaw is 28 years old.
That's the thing. That's the thing, Kevin. Why do we all of a sudden we keep talking about 30 years old? 30 years old, that guy, if he keeps himself in shape, which he always does, he's just a baby.
I'm with you. I'm just talking about how a team would view it contractually. Kinlaw is 2 years younger than Terry. So that's all. Something like that anyway. Somewhere in that neighborhood.
But look at Kinlaw. You say he's about 27 going on 28. But what has he done? Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Right. Well, still
the 33 million.
Yeah. Still what they gave Kinlaw, it seemed like a lot, but it's still not, way up there on the list of D tackles. But thanks, JYD. Appreciate it as always. Let's go to Skip. Skip, go ahead.
Kevin, I feel very strongly about this. I'm with Terry right now until, like you said, we need more information about the actual numbers. But I think like the previous caller said, I don't think the dollar amount is the issue. I think it might be the years. because that fourth year, I think they're good for 3 years at that around $33 million. So that would be almost $100 million, which seems like a lot of money. And I think Terry, physically, with his injury history, is good.
That would be the aggregate value of the deal. It wouldn't necessarily be what they guaranteed.
No, not the guarantee. Right, You're right. The guarantee, I think you're right, is going to be around 70. Because I think they're going to have to pay him top 5 receiver money because, as you always say, the deal today is going to look like a bargain a year from now.
Right.
So if they give him a top 5 deal now, it's going to be, probably top 10 a year from now. Right. So you got to consider that. And it's that fourth year. Has to be optional because now you're talking about the year that Jaden's going to get paid. And so they have to consider all that. And that's why I'd be more on the team side as far as if he wants a fourth year, then absolutely not. That has to be optional.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the case, Skip, as much because they can certainly, from a cap standpoint, front load it so that year 4, even if it's a guaranteed year, ends up being, a low cap year. Like, by the way, there wasn't a lot of guaranteed money left on John Allen's last year of the deal, which is why they were able to move on from it. So that sort of structure would make sense because, we're 2 years away from paying Jaden.
Is that DK Metcalf's deal, that fourth year?
I'll look it up. DK Metcalf's, the way that it's accounted for, actually, the base salary is its highest in the final year of the deal in 2020.
Oh, okay. Well, they couldn't do that with Terry, but if he gets a similar deal to DK Metcalf with the numbers a little bit different, I think his guarantee is around 60, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So if it's something a little bit north of that, I think Terry would be happy with that.
And that's the most important number, just so everybody understands. The average annual is a way to sort of, put yourself into the conversation of, where you rank among receivers. But it's what they call the practical guarantee that is the most important number for team and player and agent. Skip, thanks. Let's go to Scott in Rockville. Scott, go ahead.
Hey, so let me ask you, 3 years, $28 million. You build in incentives, you build in bonuses. Why wouldn't that work? I mean, literally, is Terry McLaurin Gary Clark? No, he isn't.
Yeah, I mean,
what could you do with that?
Well, I mean, 3 years, $84 million. It would depend on the guarantee. If you're guaranteeing $70 million of it, it's not the way deals typically go. But nothing would be wrong with that if the massive majority of it was guaranteed.
Yeah, so why couldn't we make that work? I mean, why?
Well, maybe they're looking at something like that. I don't know where they are specifically on both sides, what Terry's asked for and what the team's offered.
I mean, I just think that, you start talking north of 30 million. I don't see it. I mean, he's a great player. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't see it in that price range.
Yeah, I mean, you could be at 30 million a year, but a lot less guaranteed. I mean, look, if we're the easiest way, and when we get into these conversations, I know that for many, it doesn't always make sense because they don't have, the list in front of them, like I do right now in terms of average annual salary for wide receivers in the NFL. You're trying to make the point that Terry's not comparable with the guys that are making $30 million a year. Amon-Ra St. Brown or higher, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf. Look, Brandon Ayuk last year being available, I was very interested. He got injured last year. Let's not forget, Brandon Ayuk had a phenomenal 2023. He was on the verge of establishing himself as an elite wide receiver, and he got hurt last year after, by the way, kind of an ugly and confrontational holdout where he didn't do himself a lot of favors during that holdout. But if that's what you're saying, I'm with you. I think Terry's really good. I don't think he's elite. I think he's, in that 7 to 12 range, basically of receivers in the NFL. Top 10 plus or minus, a spot or two.
Real quick, if I was asked you for a comp, like Redskins, Commanders, whatever, receivers, I already said I don't think he's Gary Clark. Is he Ricky Sanders?
Well, so I've done this recently. Charlie Taylor and Art Monk are never going to be caught in their various, career numbers. Terry's numbers aren't great. Like, they're not anywhere near elite numbers through the first 6 years of his career. But he is, assuming he's here for another 3 years, he's going to end up third in almost every single major wide receiver pass catching statistical category in franchise history. Do I think he's Gary Clark today? No. Gary Clark is number 3 all time behind Charlie Taylor and Art Monk in franchise history.
And
But
should be
Terry's
in
going
the
to
Hall
be
of Fame.
number 3 in all of those statistical categories when all is said and done. And then we can have the conversation.
Fair
It's too
point.
premature.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you
Remember,
taking my
Scott,
call.
we can, we understand what he looked like in his first season out of his 6 in the league with a real NFL quarterback. He did not play with a real starting NFL quarterback in any of his first 5 years. And he still produced 1,000-yard seasons without a legitimate quarterback. Let's see how we feel 3 years from now with 4 seasons with Jaden Daniels, because if he's producing 13 plus touchdowns a year, he's, not going to catch Charlie Taylor. He's not going to catch Monk on receptions. He's not going to catch, Taylor on yards, but he's going to be third across the board in every category in franchise history. And 3 years from now, if he has majorly, productive years like he did last year, even though, he didn't finish in the top 10 of anything other than touchdowns, we're going to think of him differently than we do today, or at least I will. All right. I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody. I know everybody on hold wanted to weigh in. I got a couple things to get to when we come back, including what the point guy for Washington's stadium conversations and negotiations said yesterday to Axios. That's next.
All right. Wimbledon is currently underway. Taylor Fritz defeats Karen Khachanov in 2-1 in a tiebreak to advance to the semifinal. Arnya Sabalenka defeats Laura Sigmund in 3 sets to move on to the semis. Right now, Carlos Alcaraz up 1-0 on Cam Norrie, and Amanda Anisimova is currently up 1 set in a tiebreak with Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova. And in the NBA, Devin Booker has signed a 2-year, $150 million extension to stay in Phoenix. Paolo Banchero has signed a 5-year rookie max extension with Orlando worth up to $287 million, and the Pacers confirmed that Tyrese Halliburton will miss all of next season with a ruptured Achilles tendon. The Nats, a new era begins tonight in St. Louis. Former Nats bench coach Miguel Cairo will make his managerial debut with the Nats tonight, 7:45 first pitch, and Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 7:15 on The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
I'm going to tell you what Andy Van Horn, who's the EVP, Executive Vice President of the Commanders and a point guy in the organization on the stadium front, said to Axios about the stadium current situation, the RFK current situation here in a moment. I did want to just real quickly, Steve said, where does Kinlaw rank on the list of defensive tackles? 18th in terms of average annual at $15 million a year. All right. Among defensive tackles, Javon Kinlaw's 18th. So that's not a comparable conversation. Number 2, and I just went back and pulled recent kind of deals that the 49ers had and were protracted contract negotiations, just to give you an idea of how the 49ers operated. Adam Peters came from the 49ers. Bosa signed his contract extension on September 5th, right before the season began. Last year, Ayuk signed his on August 29th. George Kittle signed his on August 29th. Those were the 3 more recent that I pulled up. So there is a history in that organization of letting it, kind of play out and believing probably that the more time passes, the more leverage they have. Many people believe that that's the way to negotiate. We'll see if Adam Peters has brought that style to Washington. It may be the case. We may not get a deal until sometime during camp or right before the season opens with Terry. I'd like him to be available for training camp. It was much more important, and not that he was going to skip training camp last year because he still had 2 years left on his deal, but they do have, some familiarity with one another, Jaden and Terry. Although with Debo involved, with Tunsil, changes in the offense that Kingsbury makes, you want him to be involved from the beginning. So Andy Van Horn was hired in March by Josh Harris and Company to be the team's executive vice president and really kind of become the point person on stadium matters. He said, remember last week when we had the mayor on, and the mayor had said that I asked her on a scale of 0 to 5, 0 being zero concerned, 5 being majorly concerned, where was she on this deal getting voted on and passed by the city council? And she said, it's my job to be concerned. It's a 4. And he said about that, quote, we don't have time on our side, so we're just sitting there as closely as possible with the council, making sure we're hearing the questions, answering them, learning about what they want, and that's our key focus, staying on plan A, helping the city council. But then yesterday, that's what he said last week. Yesterday, to Axios, he said the following, quote, we feel real urgency that we need to have a decision from the council as quickly as possible to stay on the 2030 track. That's plan A. They want this thing done and opened in 2030. He is the executive vice president, head of real estate for the Washington Commanders. Quote, if we slip past August, it gets more like a 2031 delivery because we have to be moving utilities mid to early next year. So, in the conversation with the mayor last week, remember I said at what point, does it become too late? I asked Mark Ein that, and he said, well, there's always a too late, but we're not going to get into that right now when we had Mark Ein on the show last week. They want to get this done before they break in August. And there was, Mendelson saying last week, remember, mid-September maybe when we get back. That sense of urgency, I know, has not sat well with, the business people that run the football team. All, by the way, pretty much, very successful entrepreneurs. They've never been employees, really, in a lot of their professional lives. And he just put a date on it, Van Horn did. If we don't get it by August, it's a 2031 delivery. I don't know if that's, talk to try to create more urgency, but they want a 2030 delivery. They want to be able to bid on things like the Women's World Cup in 2031. All right, we're done for the day. Thanks to all of you who called. Thanks to Grant Paulson. Thanks to Tommy for joining me yesterday, and we played it back today. Back tomorrow. Chris is up next.